The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses and nonprofits better manage the employee experience by providing the tools, training, and resources they need to take the organization to the next level. To learn more, go to our website, team@hrstories.com. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, management and HR consultants Chuck Samikian and John Tallheimer dive into the stories that matter to small business owners, nonprofit leaders, and HR professionals. We continue to be amazed at how many companies allow poor decision-making, lack of knowledge, or in some cases, hubris to cause harm to their organization. Each week we discuss stories where companies must pay large fines, lose great talent, and even stain their reputation within their community. And we tell you how to avoid the same fate. Welcome to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Hello, listeners. This is John and Chuck from the team at HR Stories. This is our 15-minute podcast where we answer your questions. So make sure you go to our link, ask questions, send us an email, ask questions. We will do our best to answer them. But we thought we would just do real quick 15-minute podcast, kind of do that. Hey, Chuck, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Here, finishing up a great week at the beach. So
nice. I love that you can work from anywhere now, which actually kind of leads us to our first question, Chuck, right?
Yes.
We have workers maybe working in different places. We have remote workers, and what laws do we need to play? So let me read the question for you and give you a little background, because I kind of know a little bit background. So what law or laws do you follow for remote workers that live/work in California, but is considered an Indiana employee or works from that Indiana office? What do you think, Chuck?
Yeah. Well, I've experienced this in a few companies I've worked at, and we actually had employees that were in Florida that we would send out to California to work at specifically theme parks like Disneyland and Universal, but they were Florida employees, but there was a project going on. They were still Florida employees for tax purposes. We didn't change a lot of that. We didn't change their home tax. They were living in a hotel, so they were temporarily there, but the hourly employees that were there for those several weeks and months that were working did have to still follow some California laws for breaks and lunches. However, when it came to other things, we did not give them, let's say, extra sick time and things like that, because they were still Florida employees that just happened to be temporarily working in California. So it got a little dicey in that regard, but because they were temporarily there, we didn't have to fully treat them as California employees.
Yeah, and I would just, this is kind of a note, right? I would be careful, and I don't know about California specifically, but I do know in New York City, if you have employees that work one day in New York City wants their taxes. And so be aware. And I thought maybe California had something similar to that. So just be aware that, again, in some of the more progressive states, you may see like, hey, well, if you have an employee working here, you need to do it. But I think the question, really, the underlying question is, if I have an employee working in another state, like full-time working in another state, although they report to me in my home office in another state, what are the laws do I need to follow?
Yeah, the laws of the state that they are living in and the laws of the state that they are working in. And in this case, the listener said they live in California, they work in California, so you have to follow that. You know, it is interesting. It does change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, doesn't it, John? And some states have memos of understanding. And I know in Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, even if you don't live in Pittsburgh, but you work in Pittsburgh, the city of Pittsburgh boundaries, they want your taxes, even though you don't live in Pittsburgh. So
Yeah.
it is kind of interesting like that. But that's a great question.
That was a good question. Yeah, I love keep asking those type of questions because they may seem for some of us, oh yeah, that's good, right? They may, but if they're complex to you or you don't know the answer, they're not a stupid question, right? And so make sure that you're asking these questions. All right, question number 2, Chuck. Would it be age discrimination if a manager does not want to promote an employee because the manager felt that the employee was too young?
Wow. Well, if they feel they're too young because they feel they're too inexperienced, then obviously that's not age discrimination. If they're not promoting because they're like, well, you know what, I was 10 years older than you when I got this job and you're way too young. Is that some sort of discrimination? Yeah, probably is. But is it illegal? What law covers that? Someone says, well, the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. No, it does not.
Yeah.
It does not. So unfortunately, if it's just purely based on that question you gave me, I don't know of a federal law that would protect that individual. That young person.
Again, right? So the Age Discrimination and Employment Act is for those individuals that are over 40, right? And so if those individuals are over 40, so in this case, where we're assuming, where both of us, I think, are probably assuming that this person's 18, 19, or 20, but who knows? Maybe they're like, well, they're too young. They're 42. They can't do this job.
Right. Right.
But so the age discrimination. So anybody over 40 is in a protected class. When you're younger than 40, you don't have an age protected class. And so there, and I think my takeaway from that is we can't make a decision about somebody's level of performance based on their age. Right. And so maybe they're 18, maybe they're 19, maybe they're 20. But if they can do the job, I don't care. Right. And so I think that's the one. I don't know. Right? We don't have enough information in that question, but that gets me as a leadership expert and as a manager expert. You're ruling somebody out because of your biases against young people. And so that's not good. Right. And so kind of doing that in there as well.
Right.
So that was a simple question, Chuck. That was a simple question. All right. So here's the last question. Question number 3. We have 62 employees, but a few work remotely out of state. If they live more than 70 miles from us, they are not covered by under FMLA, correct? Question mark. Also, what happens if we end up having less than 50 of employees within 75 miles of office? Would we lose FMLA eligibility? I would assume at this point it would be up to us if we carry the same benefit. So this is really an FMLA remote conversation. Probably should have put these in a different order, but that's the way we go here at HR Stories. So what do you think, Chuck?
Well, at first you said 70 and then you almost had me, but then you recorrected to 75. So you were trying to see if I was really listening there. But it is, this is a great question. And the FMLA is very intricate. There's the obvious river of FMLA, okay, as far as the obvious things with the law, but there's all kind of tributaries and little creeks that kind of go out and back. And because when they created this, and I think they did a pretty good job, they thought of almost every situation that they possibly could. In this situation, we've seen with working remote and with the COVID and the pandemic, a lot of people were out there working remotely. And so then the question became, well, are they covered if they're living in other states? Well, remember, it was like you can work remotely now. You don't have to be in our office here in Troy, Michigan, let's say. You can be in Florida. You could be here. You could be there. The key, John, is, are they covered? Once again, it depends. So let me give you an illustration. If you have a company, a large company, and that company is based in a particular city, but then you have salespeople out in different regions, but they all report back into the main headquarters.
Right.
They're considered to be covered, even though they are more than 75 miles away from each other and from the main headquarters. That was before COVID. And so even with COVID, it is still the same if they're reporting back in.
Yeah, and I think it was in the beginning of the year, they just reinforced that. They put out a field assistance bulletin that you can look at. It's the control, right? It's the reporting and control. If that employee is reporting and controlled from the main office, then that employee is considered, for FMLA purposes, is considered an employee of the main office and needs to be counted and get FMLA benefits. Correct? That's my understanding.
Yes. And another interesting thing is I worked for an organization where we had a large presence in Florida, we had a large presence in California, and we had a smaller presence in I think it was Mall of America up there. Yeah. And because they were further away, they reported into themselves. They had their own. They did not qualify for FMLA. I was always a little hesitant about that one, but that was the VP of HR at the time says we're not going to include them in FMLA because, and listed all that, and it was correct. So I always found that to be fascinating. But one people need to understand is that if we did decide to include them, or let's say in our handbook, we made it appear as such they were included without, let's say, culling, C-U-L-L-I-N-G, culling them out or kind of, then they could claim that they are covered under FMLA and therefore all the entitlements thereof.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say, and I've had a lot of people tell me they make that choice anyway, where in that case, they would say, you know what, it's just going to be easier if we do it for the Minnesota offices anyway. So we're not treating them differently and fairly. And it just becomes a one big company. And so you can make that choice, but as soon as you make that choice, you can have to continue to follow FMLA.
Yeah. You can't
be like, I'm not going to do that. All right. So that was part one of the question. Part two is, what happens if I have a company, a business, and I have 55 employees, but for some reason I lay off 15 of them, and now I have 40 employees? Do I still have to follow? When can I stop following FMLA? Is really the question.
Sure. So that's another great question that comes up quite a bit because some people vacillate, shall we say, up above 50, down below 50, up, and that sort of thing. The key is, did you in that year, that calendar year is what they use, did you have 50 or more employees for 20 or more weeks? So if during that 52 weeks of the year, if you were above that 50 or more threshold for 20 weeks, and then you dip down to 48, boom, you're covered. Okay. And even if you stay at 48 for the rest of the year, and John, you go into next year, you're still covered under FMLA because at one point for 22 weeks, you had 50 or more employees, and so basically the law reads, if I can remember correctly, did you have 50 or more employees in the current or preceding year for 20 weeks or more?
Okay, so basically you have to wait 12 months of being below 50 before you can say, okay, we've now been below 50 for over 12 months and blah, blah, blah. We can do that.
Yeah, I'll give you one illustration. We have a couple, like another minute or left.
Yeah.
I worked for an organization. It was a large golf course country club community, about 150 employees. A new company comes in and they bought the company, and we still have to extend FMLA. But then about 3 months into it, they decided we're going to shut down this golf course. We're going to lay everyone off. We're going to keep a core group of 15, maybe 20 maintenance people to and we're going to rebuild the entire golf course. We're going to build, resorts and this and that. Okay. But we're going to keep 15 employees because we would have had FMLA from the previous year because we had 50 or more employees. Even going into this next year with 15 employees, we still had to maintain FMLA entitlements and rights for those 15 employees.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing, right? I mean, but again, I think that's good. I love this segment, Chuck. I think we definitely need to do this more often. I love working with you, and I love these kind of things. Really brings out your wisdom and your knowledge. Just watching you kind of go, oh wait, I know that's there. Where is it in my brain?
Accessing. Right. Thank you.
Right. That's for, and then what you guys don't know, listeners, we're just going to give you some behind the scenes. I literally sent these questions to him this morning, right? So he did not have time to research them. That was him just going off there. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions for us, please let us know. Reach out to us. We want to answer them, and we'll be doing this every other week. So definitely dive in there and do that. Chuck, any final thoughts?
No, just remember, a lot of these questions came from our HR Team of One community listeners on Facebook. So if you're on Facebook, search out HR Team of One community. We'd love to see you on there. And thanks for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story.
Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.